Osio Nagad, Jennifer Loren Dawado. Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Loren, Cherokee Nation citizen and host of Osio, Voices of the Cherokee People, and Senior Director of Cherokee Film. Welcome to Chalagi, wherever we are. Many of you probably grew up hearing the term, reading is fundamental. With Cherokee authors, the fundamental pertains not only to one becoming illuminated, but also to sharing the little-known culture of our ancestors, their lifeways and worldviews. Today, we have a stellar group of living Cherokee authors who will share with us their passions for writing and for perpetuating Cherokee culture. But before we go further, we want to let you know that everyone participating today, whether in studio or working remotely, has been fully vaccinated and given a COVID-19 test before entering the building. Our staff, guests, and crew are following social distancing best practices. In today's episode of Chalagi, wherever we are, Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. will talk to us about the importance of stories in Cherokee culture. Then Chief Hoskin will join Deputy Chief Warner and me on the couch over here for a little Q&A on that topic. After that, we'll see a clip from OCO TV about Cherokee Nation citizen Wilson Rawls, author of Where the Red Fern Grows. Hopefully you have all read that one or seen the movie. Next, I'll be joined by Cherokee children's and young adult authors Traci Sorell and Andrea L. Rogers. Then we'll see another OCO TV clip about the late prolific author Robert J. Conley. After that, I will moderate a discussion with contemporary Cherokee authors Oscar Hokeah and Faith Phillips. Then we'll hear a message from Tribal Councilor Dr. Candessa Teehee. And finally, children's author Brad Wagnon will close out our program with a special message about using our unique voices and our language in books. But before we start, I'll turn it over to Charlie Shell, the pastor of Bellefonte Baptist, a predominantly Cherokee-speaking church, who will lead us in today's prayer.
Would you bow your head for a word of prayer? Okie Noir, the head to go, you hit Jesus. See you call, Sinale, each early elite. See what do guess, eat guess, Hoskin new go, see guess. See let's continue the desk on over the dog, each early elite guess. See let on the guess, to leg a year to low star, to knee low star and her guess on. Now, all is a done no day guess on again. All star not is a guess on now, ta sell it or has to guess on. All guess only hit last, the to knee low star and her guess again. Og jijalekkeessa na ogat stelto usli lohista jikkeessa og jali heli keskeessa. Häslekeessa sanu de leste del na ju doja kani häskeessa. Ni hiskin nu go usest I jali skast I dages ni go hele keessa ni. Ai henkeessa og jiskologi to keessa. Ni hiskin lagu janula hashikeessa ni. Det go ju hidis I jat jo sekeessa. Ko ja I sekeessa. Da du lisker nu stadsgæse og jeg I så gæse nej. Og lad sivgæse og gøj en idåner gæse og lad en havnigå jo gæse skal nu tage den I dog hest. Og lad tage sig lidt dog hest I junedøren det gæse. Det går til nise gæse. Se vores gæse og negis gæse og jeg I sæsne går hele af. He lad sig lægge gæse og når jog I jo huse gæsene og de tager jo gæsene gæse. Ski stalo has jogi o husela. Og skæse an one day slag og nitterna I gæse nej. Den der jonslet har slags I dag gæsene går I lov gæse nej. Alle no gæse an at lægge hjælp ud så en udgæse. I skal gæse det dag gæsene går I lov gæse nej. Det er jo hisno. Galag det uden at der taluk gæsene går I lov. Når skal ue in the God's day. Amen.
Wado, Pastor Shell. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my friend and Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. for his remarks. Chief Hoskin?
OCO, thank you for once again joining us on Cherokee, wherever we are. These broadcasts reflect our commitment to share the history and culture of the Cherokee Nation. For so many Cherokee people, stories are vitally important to our community because they strengthen our identity and our sense of belonging. They remain an integral part of who we are as a tribe. So many of our cultural values are relayed to us through storytelling, from our traditional beliefs to sovereign rights as a tribal nation. Traditional storytelling was mostly based on the spoken word. However, today it's primarily relayed through the written word. When large concepts are conveyed through books, they carry enormous power as writers speak their truths. Truths we all share, or in some cases, truths we are enlightened to see because they arrive through a different lens. Books can be windows or mirrors to our identity as Cherokees. They are tools for both learning and for entertainment. This is especially true as gifted writers are able to shine a light on our history. The struggles and the successes and the historical trauma our people have endured, all while thriving despite seemingly insurmountable adversity. We have more Cherokee authors than ever generating books to share. We are collectively preserving Cherokee stories through so many popular genres like historical fiction, children's books, young adult literature, and biographies. A good children's book can create new readers and inspire new ideas through life-affirming stories rooted in cultural lessons and values. My hope is that we can build a joy of reading that lasts a lifetime and create generations of Cherokees who want to keep learning and keep reading as they grow. We want our children to have that experience. It's why the First Lady and I read to our grandkids. It's also why Deputy Chief Bryan Warner and I, along with the Council of the Cherokee Nation, have committed a record amount of resources to early childhood education and development within the Cherokee Nation. By having increased access to Cherokee-based books, we can better understand who we are, how we came to be, and where our future lies. People of all ages can appreciate a good storyteller. That's been a universal truth for Cherokee people for generations. We know this much: Cherokee stories are best told by Cherokee voices. And we have so many talented individuals writing incredible modern Cherokee stories, both fiction and nonfiction. With contemporary adult writing, we know that sometimes well-executed writing can help tell difficult truths and ideas, often better than nonfiction does. Quality storytelling ensures we don't forget our history, and it can help create an understanding of Cherokee sovereignty and self-determination. As we continue to preserve and perpetuate the Cherokee culture, creativity plays an essential role. And storytellers, including several you will hear from today, share our experiences to Cherokee and non-Cherokee audiences through their exceptional published works. They instill inspiration, stoke our imagination, and inform the people who dive into the narrative. Without doubt, as a nation, we are blessed to have so many diverse and unique voices reminding us what it means to be Cherokee. Wado.
Wado, Chief, and thank you for joining Deputy Chief Bryan Warner and me to continue this conversation. Thanks for being here, Deputy Chief. Yeah. First, Chief Hoskin, in your address, you talked about how your administration is choosing to invest in early childhood development. You also talked about how you in January like to read to your grandkids. Can you talk more about the importance of having Cherokee books read to our youngest learners?
Well, you know, it's an opportunity to inspire and to get young people on the right path. I mean, early childhood education is about a lot of things, but developing literacy skills early is important, and something that we can all do, whether it's January and I reading to our grandkids, Dep reading to his kids, or creating structures and programs in our child development centers and our Head Starts, even in our new immersion school, our language school, where you're learning English and Cherokee translation. You can have an opportunity to build a foundation. And if you build that foundation for young Cherokees to not only learn reading skills, but learn reading skills in the context of what it means to be Cherokee, culturally based, learning something about our history. I mean, that is a great foundation, and that's what we're trying to do with the Cherokee Nation.
Great. Deputy Chief Warner, you are also a father, but I wonder from an educator's point of view, what can you add to that? Like, what difference does it make to introduce Cherokee books and illustrations to youngsters even before they can read themselves? And I also wonder, as a father of active boys, how do you encourage reading, sitting down and reading?
Well, to take that second piece of that question, that's tough sometimes when you're dealing with boys, as we all know. But sometimes that starts with a good teacher at school that sends home reading assignments, and we kind of get together. But we know that reading is foundational. And when I taught chemistry, I used to tell everybody, chemistry is the central science. It's applicable in all of the other sciences that are there. Reading is central to all of education. I mean, you know, it may be great that you're good at numbers and different things, but if you can't read the directions, then you've got problems. So, but, you know, touching on that second piece, that's a matter of the heart when you're talking about our Cherokee lifeways, our Cherokee culture. And my hope would be that the more books that we see out there that have those pieces of that Cherokee culture, and whether it's the language, the syllabary, and all these things, or the stories that we all know that we grew up hearing from different storytellers, to put that together, that sparks places in the brain that opens up pathways for learning. And this is all scientifically founded. When you take a look at all the studies that they've done on how critical reading is at such a young age and different things. And one of the biggest pieces that I used to tell everybody is that it was fascinating to me to learn that after the invention of the syllabary, that Cherokees were about 90% literate across the Cherokee Nation. And that is something to be really proud of when you look at literacy rates across the United States today. So I can't help but think that it would be paramount to us to get more children's books that have more Cherokee values, more Cherokee culture, more Cherokee language in those, and start as early as we can. Even if you, as a parent, those words sometimes are tough to say, but the more and more that we perpetuate the Cherokee language and then we preserve these things, it gives people the opportunity to go out there, whether it be on the web or to come down and visit our language warriors at the Durbin Filling Language Center and figure out how to say some of these things and take these books and then go back and read those to those kids. Because as I start to introduce new words in Cherokee to my kids, it sparks imagination, it sparks creativity, and that's what we have to do to perpetuate anything Cherokee.
Absolutely. So this next question is for both of you. If we move up a few years to our young adult readers, this is the age where our kids, grandkids, they're finding their voices, they're becoming worried about social norms and pressures. So what can you say about that age group and the importance of having Cherokee books in front of them, for them to have the option to read?
Well, I think for young Cherokees, part of coming of age is your identity, and that's true for any young person. But I think if you're Cherokee, having a strong identity as a Cherokee is important, and I think it can be something that can ground you and it can set you up for success in the future. How do we do that with young people? Making sure they're exposed to their own culture and heritage, and you can do that through reading. We have so many authors that are speaking to that and talking about culture and heritage. Also history, though, and I'm a big believer in all of our people, and I'm a good example of somebody that continues to try to learn our history because it helps us know where we came from. And if I wanted young Cherokees to do anything, is to be understanding of where you came from, understanding that you came from a people that are very strong, that have overcome a great deal. And I think in their personal lives, they can think about, I'm Cherokee, I can overcome a great deal, and we can do it collectively. So I think we need to encourage those readers in that age group to really remember where they came from, and we need to help them do that.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, and it's the power of perspective. When you go out into the communities and you hear different stories and you start to hear the Cherokee language spoken, we start to understand the different dialects, and they just may be a few miles in separation, and it's Cherokee language, but the dialect is very different. The power of perspective is being able to take in there and and read something that somebody else from maybe somewhere else that understands something in a different way, that you can go in, because you may not be able to have that conversation one-on-one with that individual, but that book, that article, whatever that piece of material is that you're reading, it helps to give you that little bit more knowledge. And really, when we're looking at wisdom and knowledge, we're looking for understanding of where do we come from, what do we stand for, and how can we continue to do things better as a group together in that spirit of Gadugi.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about fiction versus nonfiction. So first of all, do you all have a preference? Do you like to read both, or are you more of a nonfiction? You like sci-fi, don't you, Chief Hoskin?
I like sci-fi, but I really spend a lot of time reading nonfiction about Cherokee history, trying to make sure that as chief, I kind of, as I said, know where we came from.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of a newspaper guy, believe it or not. I like to read a lot of different articles. I grew up, my grandmother read a lot of stories about racehorses and different things, so imagine that. But, But at our house, I love that sci-fi. I love different things. So I try to take in as much. Today's time, though, I find myself reading just a lot of different types of articles that give you, hey, what's going on in that area and stuff. But I think anything to keep us up to date with current activities, but we never want to fall short and remember our historical significance throughout time. So, all the above for me.
Okay. Talking about fiction versus nonfiction, just this morning, in a twist of fate, I was making my daughter's lunch and I unpacked a library book from her backpack, and it was about the Cherokee people written in the 80s, and it was about a third of it was inaccurate. And I think it's important, I can address it with her, but where do we send people to find accurate information on Cherokee people?
It's a good question, and it's a question that I'm thankful we get increasingly from our citizens. Where can we go to access accurate information? I think there's an awareness that for generations other people told our stories, and it often happened in the context of school textbooks or just other people, even in an academic setting, telling the Cherokee story, maybe inaccurately. So I think that a great source is our own bookstore. The Cherokee Nation Gift Shop has a collection of books that goes through a vetting process, and so you can be assured that those books are good quality sources of information. And I think we also have to recognize that there are some really wonderful writers in our midst. I mean, a friend of mine, Council Member Julia Coates, gifted me one of her books. It was a book about the Trail of Tears. I recently finished it. It was one of the best books on the Trail of Tears that I've ever read. She's an academic. She's a professor by trade, and I think it was something to know that a Cherokee wrote that, somebody that doesn't just research it, but it's personal to her. And I think that we have a lot of those authors out there. And you can go beyond books and get information. OCO TV is a great source of information. Visit Cherokee Nation website, where you can also access that gift shop I told you about, I mentioned earlier, and access these books. So we have a lot more resources today, Deputy, for the Cherokee people and for everyone than we had when we were younger. And I think that's a good thing because there's a hunger for it.
Absolutely. Well, and taking it one step further, and you get into those history books and you start reading about different things, and you find that these artifacts and these systems actually exist. You can hop right over from that bookstore or from the gift shop and go next door to the research center, and that team of folks will bring out the things, and that really brings it to life, and it makes it so much more tangible for those individuals. I think that is an exciting journey that I would love to see many people take with their children, their grandchildren, their nieces, their nephews. Find a good book, find something to do together, come through, and then take it one step further and actually go to that research center and investigate on your own. Open those doors to the mind so that learning can happen throughout life.
I love that idea. Great. Deputy Chief, in your role, you get the opportunity to enjoy fellowship with elders and other Cherokees living in communities throughout the reservation, and I would assume that at time involves storytelling.
Yes.
So can you talk about the importance of that act and passing along those stories and how it can leave an impact?
It is so important. And in my role as the deputy chief, it's been I can't tell you how important it's been. I remember when Sammy Still came to Carl Albert, and it was a night we had a foundation dinner, and he was telling stories, and he told the story about the donkey that the farmer thought was old and he needed to replace. And these are stories of resilience. These are stories of triumph. These are stories of overcoming. These are stories that teach us that when certain things are so sacred, like when the turtle lost its whistle, there's things that are sacred that you have to be careful. That really invokes that spirit of creativity in our individuals, because when those kids, Chief, you've been around after Robert Lewis leaves the building and then you're up next. Everybody's following Robert Lewis out the door, or other good storytellers, because they're so animated. But those kids start to make up their own stories, because my kids have came back home and said, "Dad, does this sound like a good Cherokee story that I could put together?" And that is where that's priceless. That is priceless.
That is. Chief Hoskin, pushing forward on that, telling stories remains an important part of Cherokee culture and lifeways today, but writing a book or reading a book goes even further. So what would you like to see as far as Cherokees on the literary scene, which you already touched on a little bit, but what are your hopes and dreams on that front?
Well, it's the same as when I think about Cherokee art or Cherokee language, which is what is the generation coming up going to do? And I think in the generation coming up, there's so much talent, there's so much opportunity to help encourage them to be the writers of tomorrow. I mean, on this show, people are going to get exposed to some great Cherokee writers. There's got to be some young people out there, though, that have a story in their mind, and we want to help them, encourage them to take that story from their minds and put it on paper. I think, Deputy, we're going to see a generation that's almost a renaissance of Cherokee culture, of Cherokee writing, Cherokee creativity. I don't think there's any bounds, really, and I think we're going to at least have the good fortune to bear witness to it.
Oh, exactly. And, you start thinking about the things that all of these great stories, when you start telling stories about Marigold or Ross, I mean, that's a whole new generation of engineers that this country needs and everything. So there's so many little pieces out there that come back right to essentials. And what is that essential in any education? It's reading. And it's what are you going to do with that information?
You never know what will inspire someone when
That's
you're
right.
reading a book. All right, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here and for this conversation. And we will look forward to what's in store and hope for more Cherokee books to be published each year. So, Wado. This has been a great discussion about Cherokee authors and their important contributions to our history and lifeways. Coming up next, OCO TV produced a segment on renowned author Wilson Rawls, best known for Where the Red Fern Grows. Enjoy. He was best known as the author of Where the Red Fern Grows and Summer of the Monkeys. Woodrow Wilson Rawls was a Cherokee Nation citizen who wrote stories based on his childhood, growing up in the hills of northeastern Oklahoma around the Illinois River. As there was no school in his community of Scraper, Oklahoma, Woody, as he was known, was educated at home by his mother. As in Where the Red Fern Grows, Rawls' grandparents owned a small general store.
Hey, Billy!
And his grandmother would order books for the children. Jack London's Call of the Wild was the book that Rawls would cite as his influence in becoming an author. He wanted to write adventure stories like that, about dogs in the outdoors, for boys like himself. And so he would practice writing on the riverbank and tell the stories to his coon dog, Rowdy.
Anything I could hear, I'd try in the only way I could to describe what I'd heard with that stick in the sand. To this day, you can find those sandbar words all through these stories.
As a young man, Wilson Rawls wrote Where the Red Fern Grows and many other stories. But since he was mostly uneducated, he couldn't spell or punctuate and ended up burning all of his manuscripts out of frustration. It wasn't until he married his wife, Sophie, that she convinced him to rewrite his stories. With Sophie's help, Rawls rewrote Where the Red Fern Grows completely from memory and published it in 1961. It originally appeared in 3 parts in the Saturday Evening Post as The Hounds of Youth. The book quickly became a favorite among school teachers and children alike, and Rawls followed that success with his second novel, Summer of the Monkeys, in 1976. Though it took him most of his life, Rawls accomplished his dream of writing children's novels about animals in the outdoors. Woodrow Wilson Rawls died in 1984 after spending his last years visiting thousands of schools, speaking to school children all over the country. His story is incredible. What an author. Easily the most impressionable of our people are children. Regardless of geography or ethnicity, being able to connect with and engage young people through literature is, I imagine, among the most difficult demographics for any author. My 2 guests today are Andrea L. Rogers and Traci Sorell, and they certainly have what it takes. Welcome, ladies. I'm so excited to have you all here.
Oh, Wado.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in. Andrea, how did you get started writing children's books?
I was one of those kids who always read. I read all the time. I read everything I could get my hands on. And so from that, I think I just assumed I would be an author. So I always wanted to be a writer. And so when I was in elementary school, they were filming The Outsiders in Tulsa, and my dad bought me a copy of The Outsiders. And so I read that, and I read it, and I reread it. And of course, Essie Hinton had become an author by the time she was going to college, wrote The Outsiders in high school. And so that was always sort of a goal. It didn't happen, but that's okay because I wasn't ready. And so I think becoming a children's author, I wasn't ready until I had my own kids. And so once I had my children, I saw that the landscape for Native authors hadn't changed a whole lot since I had been a kid. And so you can have the best librarian in the world, but if those books aren't being published, they can't hand you a book by a Native author. And so I had great librarians, wonderful librarians, and they would save the ghost stories for me, and they'd set aside books they knew I would enjoy. But there just were no books for children when I was a kid by Cherokee people or by Native authors in general, for the most part. And the books that were there kind of don't depict Native people after 1890. So later on, when my youngest was in kindergarten in Texas, and this would have just been 10 years ago, she told, the kids in her class she was Cherokee, and they said, "You can't be Indian, all the Indians are dead." Well, if you looked at literature at the time, you might have thought that was true. But, there was definitely a lack of books for kids about Native people who, as living, thriving people like we are, and they depict contemporary Native people.
Wow. Well, so glad you jumped in there and threw your hat in the ring. I mean, it just, the talent, you're so talented at it. You can tell you've been a lifelong reader. So my next question is for Traci. What are some of the challenges that you have encountered writing children's literature in particular?
Oh, there are several. And I think, if we want to start at like kind of the high level and work backwards, right now, one of the bigger challenges that I'm not really in control of is book banning. So, like Andrea and many others, we put ourselves in a place where we're working to share these stories in fiction and nonfiction. At the same time, there are definitely concerted efforts, by small but very vocal groups that are organizing to keep those books out of the classroom, out of libraries where our young people can have access to them. Because unlike banning books for adults, which I'm not in favor of either, adults can find those. Our young people, even through teenage years, get access to books from the adults around them, whether they're in their home or in their school or, like I say, from the library. Other challenges that I've experienced, unlike Andrea, yes, I loved reading as a child, but I didn't plan to do this as a career. And so, like anything that you take on that's new, I had to learn what is it like to craft a story for young people who are incredibly intelligent and very curious and have strong sense of fairness and justice and absolutely do not want to be lied to, right? So whatever story I'm crafting, I've got that in mind. And that has, of course, led me to, very close up, have to look at myself and examine myself. Who am I? Who am I walking in this world? Who are the people that I've come from? What do I want to contribute to children's literature and literature for teens that hopefully will help those who are here now and maybe in the future, have an easier time of it? Because, like Andrea mentioned, the erasure and invisibility is still a problem. If you look at textbooks and the curriculum that our children have access to, we're invisible. Certainly after 1900, and prior to that is very little snippets of things. So parents, other family members, community members, teachers, librarians, all depend on our books being out in the trade market to help them have the things that are not available still in this 21st century in curriculum.
I know it. That's true. Okay, Andrea, why, drilling down really on this, why is it so important to have that Native representation in children's literature?
I think with children's books, kids get it. If you've ever asked a little kid, like 3 or 4 years old, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? They might tell you a unicorn, right? They might tell you a magician or a dragon. But how many of them have read books about a woman who's a chief of a nation, right? So the books give children a view to a possible future. And so until you show them what the possibilities are, it's sometimes really hard for a kid to figure out where they're going, what they want to be, who they want to be like. And when, you know, you only have certain role models and certain places where you feel like you're allowed to be, a lot of us, that's where we're going to head, just because that's our only option. Some of us need maps. And I was someone who needed sort of a map to start writing the kind of stories I did based in, you know, my own family, basically my own culture, representing my own culture, until I saw other writers were able to do that and not do it in a way that anthropologizes us,
Right.
not do it in a way that is stereotypical. Because I didn't think publishing would publish the stories that were more accurate, that portrayed us as contemporary Native people with agency. We've definitely had trauma, but we're not defined by that trauma. And so being able to show kids that there are options out there, whether they want to be, you know, a baseball player or whether they want to be a scientist or the chief of a nation, being able to see that those are possibilities gives them some idea of what do I need to do to get there. And so you can have a map and know that that's the point you want to get to at least. You may get there differently from someone else. Like I got here by writing fan fiction from my friends in high school, right? And then I was always writing, always trying to tell stories. And then Traci's been telling stories all her life too, but in a different field.
Yeah. Well, and like for We Are Grateful, Ojali Haliga, you know, I was very much thinking about what about those children in our communities who maybe have grown up within the community and have no books showing them in a contemporary setting. But what about those children who maybe have grown up in our communities, maybe they live at large, and they are not involved in all of these things, right? But you know, they walk into that classroom and someone says, but your people don't exist anymore. It's like, no, we need to help others understand that we are still here, that the Trail of Tears was not the end for us, right? It was one chapter, and also that history is important to share from our perspective with young people, right? Because otherwise we allow it to happen again. You know, maybe not to us, maybe to other Indigenous people. I mean, you look at the displacement of people arriving at the border who predominantly are Indigenous, it's because they're being displaced from their lands, right? So these things will repeat themselves, and young people won't be aware if we don't give them stories, fiction, nonfiction, to help them make sense of the world.
And I have to say, you know, being a parent myself and having those moments, you know, at bedtime, it's an intimate moment with your child, and it's so special you can feel that aha moment when you're reading and they ask you a question. And so I think there are so many of those aha moments to be had in all kinds of books, but when you have a Cherokee child and you can make that a Cherokee moment, I think it's been really powerful. So it's really exciting to have the literature that you all are producing for those moments.
But similarly for adults, I can't tell you how many parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents have said, I appreciate the book opening the conversation, right? Giving us that framework to talk about things.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So Traci, in what ways have your Cherokee roots impacted and influenced your writing?
Well, as Andrea had mentioned earlier, I mean, as a child, I knew my reality in my family and in my community, but I never saw that on the page of a book. And so certainly that impacted me bringing my son up. It's like, well, we have these family stories and you can have these experiences, but what's going to happen when you're in school? And so, you know, we have many Cherokee values, right, that we're raised with. But certainly one of the things that you know, I was raised with, and in classified, when I talk about Mary Golder Ross, like we come from people that education is important. And that's not just education in the classroom. That is taking your talents and gifts and abilities that the Creator has given you and use those to help others, right? So I definitely recognized a problem. Where are these books that show us in our full humanity? Okay, I certainly can try to figure out how I can find these books, and then when I couldn't find very many of them and not about us, how do I figure out how to write them? So my Cherokee roots also help me in that none of the books that I have created or will ever create are created in a vacuum or just myself. Our people are incredibly generous, and we're known for our hospitality and our generosity. All of these books have so many fellow citizens who have helped make them where they're at. So, you know, my name may be on the cover of them, but I always say, like, there are hundreds of people around these books, not to mention ancestors, you know, and others that have prayed us into being here, right? So it's very much integral in what I do every day, is centering how, you know, am I reflecting on our culture in a way that tells the truth, and presents us in our full humanity. And so many, many people help me do that, and I'm very grateful for that.
I love that. Andrea, for those viewers who might be interested in becoming a writer or perhaps an illustrator, can you talk a little bit about the process of getting a book published? What's that like?
It's a lot of work, and if you don't have patience, it's really difficult to make it in publishing if you don't have patience.
Yeah.
There's a book I've written called When We Gather, which Heart Drum is going to publish in the summer of 2024, and that's I sold that book 2 or 3 years ago. But you know, you find an illustrator. Some illustrators work, some don't. Some aren't a right fit. Even finding an illustrator can be it can take years. And we need more Native illustrators. We need more Cherokee illustrators, because we do. It is great to have an artist who actually comes from the culture and doesn't need you to send them pages of research.
Right.
And so if you're a writer, the biggest thing I would say is to read. I mean, you've just got to read. And so find mentor texts, and not just 1 or 2 or 3, but go and walk through the bookstore or through the children's section at the library and see what books are interesting, see what's missing, see what's there that really speaks to you, and you know, figure out why it speaks to you. What is it about it? Is it the artwork? Is it the words? Is it the sensory details? Is it, you know, that it's heartwarming? Is it showing a value, a cultural value that you're not seeing in other books? Which that was big for, you know, trying to find books to read to my kid. And so go and read as many of those as you can, figure out what you like about it, you know, and write your own story.
But when you say also, I mean, picture books to young adult novels now, the whole spectrum is very different than when we were younger. And so you really have to also study the market. As much as you're looking at the craft, it is recognizing that things are very different today.
Yes, definitely. And so you don't want to base it, you know, oh, these books were classics when I was a kid, so I'm going to write that. I love this book. I love this book. And it's like, yes, you loved it, and so did thousands of other people, and many, many, many versions of that book have been written. What's next? And I think that's what part of the representation question speaks to me about, which is also representing a Cherokee future, right? What do we want the world to look like? It's not just what the world looks like now. What do we want it to look like? And how do we help our kids imagine that? A webpage, Kidlit 411 is a really good resource for if you're looking for like how to write a kid's book, how to do it, how to do illustration, how to do graphic novels. And so that's a really good resource that doesn't cost anything, and you can visit it and, you know, see what, you know, don't reinvent the wheel. Because there's a lot of work out there about how to do the thing. So the important thing is to figure out how to do the thing and then to go do the thing. And you might have to do the thing a lot. And you might have to have a lot of people read it. My readers are, I mean, they're the most important people in my process because we all have blind spots and we all think we're communicating clearly. And often we're not, especially in writing. And you have to remember who your readers are. And I think I know that I think, the do no harm phrase means a lot to me when I'm writing for children, is how do I tell a really sad story that's really true and that you need to know, but do it in a way that doesn't leave you without hope, right? Because these are for kids.
That's a great point. The balancing act. Traci, you did not start your career as a writer, but rather as a lawyer. So what advice do you have for those viewers who are considering having a career in a creative field?
Don't quit your day job. That's what I would say first. Don't quit your day job. And understand that with any creative field, you are learning something and you're going to have lots of failure. So there'll be times when you're like, oh, I want to say it this way, or I want to draw it this way, and your skill set's not there. So there are things that I want to write and I'm ready to hit the ground running doing, but my skill set's not there right now. So understand that that's that practice, that's that reading, that's studying the market. It's like looking at how are picture books constructed now, how are these different things, and just perseverance. I mean, and when we want to talk about Cherokee roots, like we have perseverance, right? So it's not that you can't learn it, but any creative field also invites commentary. And sometimes people love your stuff. And then there are people who are like, it's fine, it was good, and then there are people that can't stand it. And that's going to be everywhere all the time. And so having a thick skin is critical to just say, that's fine. I know I'm not for everyone. What I write is not for everyone. You're not, I pick up books all the time, even picture books, as short as they are at 32 pages. And I may get a few pages in and not finish it. And that's okay.
Right.
It's not for me, So I would just say, keep going. And if you are wanting to write fiction or nonfiction that deals with Cherokee people or Native people in general, just make sure, to Andrea's point, that you're not doing any harm, that you do your work, because we have so many representations of us that paint us really in a kind of these pan-Native, broad terms. And our experience is our experience. And so our language and our culture, that is at the root of who we are, and that needs to be respected in whatever is shared in public, and it's completely doable. It's just you do need patience, and I'm not a patient person. I will admit this. Everyone who knows me knows this, but even I have been able to deal with, oh, you wrote this book and you sold it 4 years ago and now it's not coming out. I joke about Powwow Day. That book is older than most of its readers. I wrote it in 2014. It came out in early 2022. So when I do school visits, I'm like, how many of you were 7.5? And I'm like, okay, my book's as old as you are. So, you have to have patience and flexibility. It's a group effort. Team making, book making is a team sport. And, but man, it's enjoyable.
Very good. Yeah. Well, we are out of time, but quickly, before we go, I just want to, shed light on the fact that you're both award-winning Cherokee authors. And I think, your books are for most people. And Andrea, you just recently got a big award for one of your books. Can you tell us quickly?
I got the Walter Dean Myers Award.
I hear this is a big deal.
Very big deal. Yes. And it was, it's a newer award, but the books that win this award they're great books. They're really great books. I mean, if you look at the list of past winners and even just the honor books, there's some really great work out there. And it's devoted to, the award is for diverse writers, writing books with literary merit, and that have diverse representation.
Yeah, there's a larger organization, We Need Diverse Books, that gathers a team of people from across the country, teachers, librarians, others, to read and evaluate the books.
They read a lot of books.
And when we saw that, I was like, yes, we are there. Like we have
all
taken
of us Cherokees are rooting you ladies on.
Fantastic.
And also, before we go, we will be featuring Traci Sorell on season 8 of OCO TV, so keep an eye out for that.
Wonderful.
Thank you, ladies, both so much for being here. Wado. Up next, we have an OCO TV profile on prolific Cherokee author, the late Robert J. Conley. Take a look.
I think Cherokees respect the old stories as teaching devices, as entertainment.
Prolific Cherokee author Robert J. Conley promoted Cherokee culture throughout his lifetime, writing more than 80 books over the course of his career.
Robert was one of those writers who loved history, and he would take an incident out of Cherokee history, something that was true, and base a novel around it.
During Robert's childhood, it was his grandparents who fostered an interest in his Cherokee heritage.
He grew up listening to his grandfather tell stories and his uncles and, people in his family, and then he continued that. That was part of what I think made him who he was. It was a storyteller, really.
In 1975, Robert received a call from the Cherokee Nation, inviting him to come work as a writer.
But that's when we met, was when he came to work for the tribe. I didn't pay any attention at first, but then when he started writing poetry to me, then I started listening. Eventually, I came around.
Robert and Evelyn married in 1978, and Robert continued developing his writing. His first novel, Back to Malachi, was published in 1986. He said it was written out of anger at the misrepresentation of Ned Christie in Western literature. Christie was a Cherokee patriot who had been wrongfully labeled as an outlaw and murdered by lawmen. In 1992, Mountain Wind Song, a novel of the Trail of Tears, was released. Hailed as an American classic, Mountain Wind Song was adapted into a musical in 1995. It premiered in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and starred Cherokee opera star Barbara McAllister. Throughout the 1990s, Robert also wrote the Real People series. The 10-book-long venture illustrated events and figures from Cherokee history through a fictional lens. Then, in 1995, Robert was approached by Cherokee Chief Wilma Mankiller to write a complete history of the Cherokee Nation.
But I had never done a book-length nonfiction work, and so that worried me a little bit. But it also worried me that I was dealing with such a vast and I think, such an important history.
The Cherokee Nation, A History, was published in 2005. It was the first Cherokee history written by a Cherokee Nation citizen and officially backed by the tribe. In 2010, Robert became the first Native American president of the Western Writers of America, and in 2014, he received the organization's Owen Wister Award for Lifetime Achievement.
We encourage you to watch the entire stories that we've shown you snippets of today and many more Cherokee documentaries on our website, free of charge and at your convenience at oco.tv. Okay, Oscar Hokeah and Faith Phillips are with me now to talk a little bit about contemporary Cherokee books, which have enjoyed a resurgence in the past decade. CO Nagad, thank you for being here.
CO,
thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure. I feel like I'm fangirling out over all these Cherokee authors.
I know, me too. We're trying to coin a new term around here, celebrities. We're surrounded by celebrity authors. So we're really excited to have both of you here. Faith, I'm going to jump right in. Starting with you. So during your time, you taught at Stillwell High School here in Cherokee Nation, and you led the students there to do some pretty incredible projects that garnered national attention. So could you talk a little bit more about those projects?
That situation was really interesting because it was after my third book came out, and it felt like my book career was just taking off. And so selfishly, I was really thinking about my literary career. And that was right when the Stillwell High School principal contacted me and said, hey, we really need an English literature teacher and a creative writing teacher at Stillwell High School. And I said, absolutely not, just because I felt like I really needed to stay on point with my career. And then I really started thinking about it. And I had graduated from Stillwell High School, and my whole life I'd been writing and reading, but I never considered writing as a career. So I just thought it might be a really good thing to go to Stillwell and teach writing and just kind of maybe inspire some Cherokee students, because at Stillwell High School we're 80% Cherokee students. Mm-hmm. So I agreed to go teach, And I got there, and at first they didn't care that I was an author. They didn't know who I was. They were not impressed at all. They were kind of like, "Who's this old lady?" And but it took a little while, and eventually they warmed up to me. And I really think it kind of turned around homecoming time. I helped them do a Rocky-themed float, kind of the underdog, and I worked weekends with them, and so we formed this little family in the classroom. And we started working on projects, and the very first one we did was Strawberries in the Death Capital. And that came out of the Washington Post, wrote an article. It said, Stillwell, Oklahoma, the strawberry capital, is the death capital of the U.S., which was really offensive to a lot of us in Adair County, because that to us that's our home. To me, it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Grandma lives. That's where we get our fried bread and honey. And so I just asked the students, is this really the death capital of the U.S.? And they felt very strongly about it. Absolutely not. And I said, okay, if we've got an issue here, then why don't we answer it? Why do we have an outsider coming in to tell our stories? So they took the article and they broke it up into different sections of why the argument was that we were the death capital, and they started researching it. They contacted our congressman, the mayor of Stillwell, the chief of police, the Department of Environmental Quality, and they very civilly started engaging our public servants and asking these tough questions of, why do we are we dying earlier than people across the United States? And if so, what's happening here? What's happening in our home? Because I felt very strongly like if you do have a problem, you can't begin to fix it unless you talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually did some really serious investigative journalism, and they not only made this podcast that went on to become a finalist for the National Public Radio Student Podcast Challenge, but they also presented solutions to the community, and they just started knocking it out of the ballpark, just one project after another, mostly surrounding these podcasts. They did a Missing Murdered Indigenous Women podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And then my creative writing students did a podcast about the 1977 Girl Scout murders, which turned into a national TV series. So it's really interesting that I came from this perspective of thinking I'm going to mess up my career by going to serve these students.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually they pretty much broke my career.
But also in that story, we are hearing about so many different types of writing. I mean, you've got investigative journalism, a rebuttal to writing. You were talking about writing, which turned into a podcast. So there's writing in podcasting, there's writing in television series. So it's interesting how in such a short amount of time you touched all of those different areas of writing. So very cool.
It was really exciting, and I still keep in touch with my students. And that wasn't the only thing. They also started writing Cherokee syllabary and their poetry, and they were selected for the Chicago Field Museum for the Native Truths exhibit. So they were just extraordinary, and they had all of this raw talent just waiting to be mined, and they did amazing things. It was great.
Proof that words are powerful. And Cherokees have a lot to say.
We do.
Yes. Oscar, what do you decide to include in your work versus maybe keeping some ideas sacred when you're writing? Is that something you have to tackle on a regular basis?
Yeah, I think it's something that I, take into consideration as I'm writing. So, the way I write, whenever I write like character-driven fiction, and so more or less what I do is I let the characters kind of tell me what needs to be in the story. And because I'm writing about, the Cherokee community, I'm going to run into elements like, cultural elements, some sensitive topics in the community, kind of like with what Faith had mentioned, with there are some disparity elements within the community that we need to talk about. And so the one way that we do talk about it is to write about it, and so that we can engage the community to think critically about those things. And so whenever I come across things like cultural elements where maybe I need to hold back a little bit. And I guess that's how I think of it as far as keeping certain things sacred, where I might hold back on some of the details. And so let me give you a couple examples really quick. So in the novel, there's a character by the name of Lonnie No Water in my debut novel, Calling for a Blanket Dance. So Lonnie No Water comes from a particular family that has a lot of meth use. Their family does, has a lot of criminal activity, a lot of illicit type of activity. And so in order for me to write about this character and to talk about her in the way that, a lot of times, Cherokees, we talk about ourselves and each other in these family groups. So I would say, I'm a stop. I'm a 2P stop. So STOPP. And so immediately you would know, oh, I know who your family is. You might know one of my cousins. You might have some stories to share, good or bad. But, and so we talk like that with each other. And so I wanted to capture that element in the novel as well. So I couldn't use an actual Cherokee last name to do that.
Right.
And so I had to take that into consideration. And so I had to come up with a last name that sounded Cherokee, but it also gave me an opportunity to create some symbolic value for the novel. So the last name No Water, while it does kind of sound Cherokee, it's not a real Cherokee last name, but it does capture an element of this character doesn't have any expectations. Nobody gives her expectations to do better. And so No Water means no expectations. And that it pops back up throughout the novel as well. So, so I take those kind of considerations whenever I'm writing. I want to make sure that I write with a critical eye because I'm a literary fiction writer, and so I need to do that. But I also want to write with compassion as well. And so also, when it comes to like cultural elements, the main character, Evergy Masato, his grandmother, her name is Lena Stop, and she goes to stomp dances. And so while I'll say she'll go to a certain area, I don't specifically name any grounds. And so similar in the novel as well, his younger sister, I think I say something about her going to the stomp grounds to find her boyfriend. And so she drives out toward Vian. And so what I do is I give you an area. So we all know what I'm talking about when I say that. But I don't name anything specific. So you can actually capture the essence of Cherokee community without getting too detailed, too specific, and kind of giving away some of that sacredness that we want to hold on to.
Yeah, so complex and a lot of decisions to be made along the way. So Faith, switching to you, so while you've had significant success writing novels, you're now starting to move into screenwriting, as you mentioned. So can you talk about the differences and similarities between those two types of writing?
Sure. It's been very strange, this transition. It was definitely not something that I ever planned. Really, just being an author to me was kind of like the idea was as far out as being an astronaut. I just never really dreamed of. Authors are like rock stars to me. So the idea of just publishing a book is so exciting. And then when it actually happened, that was my dream. My dream came true.
Can you tell us your books real fast?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
My first book is Ezekiel's Wheels, which is a fiction thriller. The second book is It's Not That Hard To, which is a collection of mostly humorous, some sad essays. The third book is my true crime novel, Now I Lay Me Down, and that details the Waleetka murders in 2008. And then finally, my last book is called 2020 Visions, which is an accounting of what happened when I went to go teach at Stillwell, and my students actually contribute in that book. So that was a really wonderful thing. And as I was writing that fourth book, I had already considered transitioning into or adapting my books into screenplays, but I wasn't quite sure how I would do that. So I just thought I would be a self-taught. I thought I would start studying screenplay writing. So I studied. I knew that it really wasn't a great transition often from novelists into screenplay writing. It's just two completely different worlds. But I studied Nabokov and also Mario Puzo, and two very successful writers, of course. And I thought I could do it, but I wasn't sure. But you're still world building. You're still just completely creating a world out of your imagination, which is such a dream come true to be able, it's almost like living in a fantasy world, to be able to do that for a living. And when my first book came out, one of my readers actually wrote to me and she said, when I read your writing, I see the film in my mind. And I took that as such a compliment, but it still never occurred to me that I might actually write screenplays one day. But the difference is so you're still building worlds out of your imagination, but the real difference is when you're writing a novel, you can really spend a lot of time inside someone's head, understanding a conversation. We're thinking all the time, and you can put that in the novel. In the screenplay, you have to actually put it on, you have to be able to visualize it. So I can't have an internal dialogue in that writing. You have to actually be able to see it. And also they have this saying in novel writing, kill your darlings, you know, because you really want that emotion to come through to your audience. If I'm crying when I'm writing my novel, I know that's a part that's going to make my reader cry. If I feel the joy of creation when I'm writing the book, I know that's going to be a good part. And so that's, you try to convey that in the screenwriting too. But as far as the kill your darlings part of screenwriting, you just have to cut. You have to cut so much, which is hard for a self-indulgent novelist, because you're used to just being so wordy, and you have to really learn. And that was just a process. It was hard for me to go through that whole, okay, I probably need to cut this.
Yeah. Oscar, do you ever get to work with other Cherokees or Indigenous creatives in maybe like the research and editing or publishing process? And if so, what's that process like? Or what is that process like in general?
Yeah. Well, whenever the type of writing that I do, it's literary fiction, and I do this brand of literary fiction that sometimes people call like autobiographical fiction. So what I'm doing is I'm drawing from personal experience. And so if there is a research, that ultimately that's what it would be, is just, real lived experience inside of the Cherokee community. And so I would take like experiences that I might have or close friends, family, and then I might mesh them together. And so by meshing them together, it creates, gaps in the storyline, and I have to fill those gaps, then it turns into fiction. So it's very much fictionalized. So a lot of the cultural community elements that I have in my novel, one, I don't really think about culture when I write. It just kind of, I just know it's going to show up. But all those elements that pop out in the storyline are just from lived experience. And so if I did need to find out something more, then I might just go down the hall to my mom's room, because she's elderly and I take care of her. And so I might ask my mom, like, hey, what was going on back in 1976, and she would tell me, some of her memories, or my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. And so that's kind of how my research goes. I actually talk to community members because they're my family. And during the editing process, it's very important for me to talk to close friends about some of the dynamics that are happening inside of the novel. Like I mentioned with the character Lonnie No Water, where I had to make some of those decisions. Those decisions came to fruition because I was talking to my close friend Brandon Phillips, who lives in Tahlequah. He's Cherokee. I was talking to my close friend Leah Hitcher, who works for Cherokee Nation as well. And so they're embedded in the community. And so I'm processing and I'm revising and I'm going through these steps to make sure that, am I going at it with the right approach? So that's kind of what my editing process is like. As far as the publishing industry itself, my agent, she's not Native. My editor, she's not Native as well. But what I tend to do is I tend to play that to my advantage. What I'm trying to do is they have such a different perspective, a different point of view, that oftentimes what they'll do is they'll catch my blind spots, And so that's kind of how I look at it. Even though I'm working with someone or, individuals who might not be from the community, what are they seeing that I might miss? Right. And I think that they trust that I have, like any kind of community or cultural elements that I can, if I don't know myself, I'll find it out. But they have such a different perspective that they can catch certain things inside of my my writing that I'm not seeing. And one of those things might be like, I tend to put a lot of energy on like the elders, because I'm older myself. So I tend to like be really fascinated with that kind of perspective. And so like my agent, Allie Levick, who she's, younger than I am, she might say, hey, Oscar, what about this younger character over here? Why don't we look at her like this and this and this? And so she gives me just a different perspective to make sure I'm catching all of those points that I need to catch.
Do your friends ever say, you got to put that in your book?
See, that's the thing about it with being a writer, right? Like, that's the danger. You might end up in my novel.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Faith, you and I originally met when you were getting ready to take some screenwriting classes, I believe. So how has Cherokee Nation supported your creative work?
That's very true. When we started out, I was applying to learn how to be a screenwriter. And the Cherokee Nation supported from the time I was in high school. The Cherokee Nation paid for my education. And so I've been supported by the Cherokee Nation from early on. But so my books were in the Spider Gallery, and then when I started to make the transition to screenwriting and I was trying to self-teach and I wasn't quite getting it, then that was right about the time when the Cherokee Nation Film Office put out their scholarships to learn screenwriting at OSU Tulsa. And so I got to learn from one of the best, Zach Litwack, and I didn't know who he was at the time, but he turned out to be this amazing teacher, and I got the screenwriting scholarship, and I didn't know if I was good enough to be a screenwriter or not. I didn't have any idea. I was just willing to try. And to hear someone, a professional like Zach, say, you're absolutely, yes, you can, you're a screenwriter. That was just such a validation, which we need to hear every once in a while. I was just talking to Oscar about that in the green room, that it's good to hear. I think it's a good thing to be have some humility. And I don't think that you would be a great artist if you walked around saying, I'm such a great writer. But it is really such a good feeling to hear other writers say, you've got it. You've got some talent. And that's really what I got from, of course, I learned the skill of screenwriting from Zach, but also to hear professionals say, you can do this.
And then the ultimate confirmation, how long? I mean, it was like, it was not very long from when you were taking that screenwriting class to when you had a television show on national TV. What was the timeline there?
That's true. Everything happened very quickly.
Yeah.
It's definitely not an overnight success story, though, because I started writing my books in 2011. But from the time I took the screenwriting class, right after that, I got accepted into the Native American Media Alliance for unscripted programs, and I got the TV series at the same time. And then right after that, after the TV series was done, I got accepted into their feature film program.
Yeah.
And last November, I was pitching my screenplays to Sony and Universal and all of these major studios. So to go from never having written a screenplay, I think 3 years ago, I had never even thought about writing a screenplay, to be pitching to major studios. I don't think that there's any way that can be underestimated how much the CNFO helped me.
It's inspirational to hear your story, though. You can do it. Yeah, I mean, you guys are celebrities telling your stories, and other people can be up here too. Oscar, what, if anything, has changed as you have published and gotten public response to your work?
I've gotten like amazing feedback. You know, it was great that when the debut landed in late July, it #1 bestseller in Oklahoma, and it was #1 bestseller in Oklahoma, I think 5-6 weeks.
That's amazing.
So it was great to see, Cherokees kind of rallying behind the book. And so I've been getting really great feedback. Not a lot has changed as far as like my creative writing style. Like I think I'm always going to do like family fiction, kind of youth worker focus. That's my background is working with youth. So I tend to put that inside of my writing. And so the type of, like I mentioned before, the type of writing that I do is called literary fiction. And I write what's called, realism, like a realistic approach to literary fiction. And it has this kind of regionalist quality. So like a hyper-local, tribally specific type of dynamic within it. And so I'm always going to stick to that modality as far as when I'm writing. And I'm hoping what it does is that it opens up doors for the Cherokees. Because the book is getting a lot of attention right now nationwide, that the publishing industry looks at it and can see the diversity within the pages and see the potential for Cherokee Nation. We're the largest tribe in America, between Cherokee Nation, UKB, and Eastern Band. We have many Cherokee writers, citizens who would be excited to be published. And there's just a diversity of perspectives, a diversity of backgrounds that the publishing world could really lean on and kind of give us an opportunity to kind of showcase many of our strengths in the community. So I'm hoping that's what the debut does.
All right, very good. Well, thank you both for being here. We're out of time, but I really appreciated this conversation, and I think everyone else will too. So thank you so much, Widow.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All of the authors who have been here today have books that can be found in Cherokee Nation gift shops or on the Cherokee Nation gift shops website or at the Spider Gallery, so be sure that you check them out. Next up, Tribal Councilor Dr. Candessa Teehee will deliver her message.
Osio, Candessa Teehee Dawado Yoneg, Iadihi Dawado Jalek. My name is Candessa Teehee, and I am the District 2 Cherokee Nation Tribal Councilor. Although all Cherokees are storytellers at heart, it takes special initiative and intense perseverance to bring a story to the page. Although writing is a solitary process where new worlds are created between a writer and their keyboard, the Cherokee authors featured today and others who have come before have created communal stories reflecting our relationships with not only our traditions and lifeways, but that also reflect the magnificence and maybe even the rebellion of what it means to be a Cherokee citizen. Pulitzer Prize winner Toni Morrison said, "If there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it." And to expand on this quote, our Cherokee authors have not only written the stories they want to see, but are also sharing them so other Cherokees can see themselves in these stories as well. Representation matters, and it is vitally important for our citizens, young and old alike, to have Cherokee stories from Cherokee authors. Whether through prose or poetry, Cherokee authors are changing the world one page at a time. Wadon.
Wado Councilor Teehee. And now we go to children's author and CCO's Community Outreach Coordinator, Mr. Brad Wagnon, for his remarks, followed by Cherokee National Treasure Tommy Wildcat to close us out. Brad?
Wado, Jennifer, and Siona God. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to join these other great authors in this event as we give you, the viewer, insights into our motivations and processes which result in sharing our views of Cherokee culture through our writings. Similar to the passion of each of you who may have a specific set of skills, we love what we do. And specifically, we love sharing our versions of Cherokee culture in the hopes of perpetuating the lifeways and worldviews handed down by our ancestors. As a Cherokee author, educator, and community outreach coordinator, Cherokee language, values, and history have been the focus of my life for over 20 years. I believe that these essential elements of Cherokee culture are best taught and exemplified in the same manner our ancestors taught them, our stories. Along with my friend and fellow Cherokee Nation employee, Alex Stevenson, I began the journey of sharing our stories in written form in 2015. We now have 3 published Cherokee children's books, beautifully and accurately illustrated by Alex, and published in English and Cherokee by Native Voices Books. These stories, as well as the others discussed today, serve as a permanent reminder of Cherokee oral tradition and Cherokee values. In my role as a CCO Community Outreach Coordinator, I have gotten the chance to meet many of you within the reservation boundaries as well as outside or at large, and talk with a few of you about my passion for sharing Cherokee stories. As you know, Cherokee Nation under Principal Chief Hoskin has been going through a tremendous effort in order to save our language, the voice which makes us unique among Indigenous people the world over. That effort has motivated me to include Cherokee syllabary in my books. It is my hope that these will be handed down to the generations, teaching our children the tribe's language, but also our stories. Perpetuating our traditions and values in our own voice is key to securing our culture for those generations. I encourage you to tell your stories to our children and grandchildren and anyone who will listen. The lessons held within can change lives and change the world. At that same time, show your support for Cherokee artists. Wado. And now it's my honor to turn the closing over to Cherokee National Treasure, Tommy Wildcat. Tommy?
da go ha da ga da ni ya ne jula ki